A few weeks ago, I made a video outlining how I ate local foods for an entire week. I got most of my foods from Okinawa Organic Harvest. Let me show you what I ate throughout that week. I'm going to start by meal prepping a little bit for the week, and I'm going to start by cooking some sweet red beans, or so I thought. They ended up just being pinto beans, but don't worry, I used them anyway. I measured out the amount that I needed and rinsed them thoroughly before soaking them for about 8 hours. After that, I wanted to prepare some rice, so again, I measured out the amount I wanted and then washed it thoroughly. Then I decided to go ahead and prep my miso soup for the week, so I started by getting some tofu pressed and ready to go. I don't have a tofu press, so I just used some plates with a weight on top. This works just fine and prevents me from buying a brand new product. Now let's prep my miso soup ingredients. I started with a carrot. I just sliced it into strips and then set those aside. And then I used the local onions that I got from the Okinawa Organic Harvest box and did the same. Kept a few in strips, diced a few into smaller pieces. Pretty much you can cut them into whatever size you prefer. Once the water was boiling, I added the rice to cook, and then back to the miso soup. So I forgot to take my homemade broth out of the freezer, so I had to defrost it in some warm water. I wanted to make my rice a little bit sweet, a little bit sticky in order to make sushi and onigiri. So in order to do this, I used rice vinegar, some sesame oil, some sugar, and the recipe called for, I want to say 3 or 4 tablespoons, I forget, but that was just way too much sugar. Next time doing this, I would probably only use 1 tablespoon of sugar because it ended up being way too sweet. I topped it off with a little bit of salt and a little bit of soy sauce as well, and then once it was warm, I whisked it thoroughly. This was a completely made up recipe, so sorry there's not really any real measurements, but I did about 4 cups of broth, 2 cups of water, probably a tablespoon or 2 of rice vinegar depending on how tangy you like it. I topped it off again with a little bit of sesame oil, probably again a tablespoon or 2. And then of course some soy sauce. This was probably about 2 to 3 tablespoons in total. Back to the sweet sticky rice mixture, just whisk it until everything is dissolved, and then once your rice is ready to go, you pour the mixture on top. Once your miso broth is at a simmer or a boil, you can add your vegetables and let them cook all the way through. I added mushrooms the next day once I picked those up from the farmer's market. Now I'm gonna prep the tofu while the vegetables cook. Again, like with the vegetables, you can put this in any sort of shape that you want. I just did small bite-sized cubes. Once the vegetables are nice and tender, make sure they are just how you want them. That's when you can add the miso paste and the tofu. For the miso paste, I probably did about 2 to 3 tablespoons. This just depends on how strong of a miso flavor you want. Make sure to mix it until the miso paste is completely dissolved. Once it is, then it's time to add the tofu. After that, the miso soup is pretty much done. I just let it sit there with the burner off and the lid on until it was good to go and the tofu was heated through. While everything on the stove was finishing up, I decided to prep some nut butter in order to make granola. Peanuts aren't very common in Japan, so I went with pecans, almonds, and cashews. Those are all pretty commonly found in Japan, if not all of them, at least some of them. And then you can make your own nut butter with any mixture you like. And then disaster struck. No! I have no words other than this is why you don't film and cook at the same time. I'm so glad I was filming though, because this is freaking hilarious. Also very unfortunate. The good news is that most of them fell in that oven drawer. The bad news is it's a little dusty, only a little. I don't want to waste these because nuts are expensive and I don't have any more to make nut butter. Denahi's getting the rest, so let's try this again, shall we? More carefully. No, Mochi! Mochi, I'm about to turn the oven on. Get out. Hey. Oh, you want this almond? Ready. Turd. Hey, no, you stay out. I'm gonna turn the oven on. I need to clean that off before I burn them. After I recovered from that mishap, everything started to go according to plan again. Once the nuts are done roasting, I only roast them for about 5 to 10 minutes, just long enough for them to start becoming oily. Then I add them to my high-speed blender. A food processor works well for this as well, and then blend until creamy. If you want to make it sweet, you can add maple syrup, molasses, honey, whatever you want, but do this after it is completely creamy. Now it's time to prep the granola. I used about a cup of oats. You can use whatever kind of oats you want. And then to make the liquid mixture for the granola, I used about 2 tablespoons of molasses, a teaspoon of vanilla, a sprinkle of nutmeg, a sprinkle of cinnamon. To that mixture, I added probably a quarter or a third of a cup of the nut butter that I just made, and then a splash of water to make it a little bit thinner. Mix it until completely incorporated, and then pour it over your oats. Again, mixing until everything is good to go, and I decided to add a little bit of shredded coconut to this as well, but you can add whatever you have access to, including whole nuts. If you want to add raisins though, definitely do that after it's baked or else they get a little weird. Pack it down if you want the clusters to be a little bit bigger, and then bake it 350 for about 15 minutes, flipping halfway and then letting it go until it's crispy and to the consistency of your liking. It's time to make some dressing for all of the salads that I had to eat. I started with a mayonnaise base, which is 1 cup of oil. I do 3/4 of a cup of oil, 1/4 of a cup of sesame oil, and then half of a cup of plant-based milk, 1 tablespoon of rice vinegar, but you can use whatever vinegar you like, and then a tablespoon of lemon juice or lime juice. If you want, you can add salt in this stage or after you mix it, and then let it sit for about 5 minutes until blending. Then it gets nice and thick and creamy. This can be used as a regular mayonnaise, but I like to turn it into a dressing by topping it off with sriracha, soy sauce, and just a little bit of water to thin it out. If you want, you can add spices at this stage too. I just added a little bit of garlic. And there you have it. A bad transition, I know, but the next morning I had yogurt for breakfast. I promise this is not the mayonnaise. I topped it off with my homemade granola, and that was my simple breakfast for the day. Time to add the mushrooms to the miso soup. I just pulled them apart individually and then added them to the simmering soup and cooked until tender. Next, it was time for dinner. And because I made a bunch of beans that didn't turn out so well, I decided to turn them into falafels with also a little bit of hummus that was going bad. I just mashed probably about a half of a cup of beans with a scoop of hummus until it was good to go. Added a little bit of flour. I don't have the exact measurements, but I just added it until it was a dough-like consistency. Put them onto my silicone baking mat and baked at 350 for about 20 minutes. Then I chopped all of the greens into a big, ready-to-go salad mix that I used for the next week or so. The greens that I got made a whole bunch of salad, and then I used the local veggies from the box to top my salad. That plus the falafel made for a great salad. I topped it with my homemade dressing and some locally made kraut. The next recipe is for a homemade pasta sauce. I received a lot of tomatoes this week in my box, and I didn't know what to do with them, so I steamed them in order to get the skins off and make them tender. Drained a block of tofu. You don't need to press it for this recipe, I just patted it dry, and then I combined the tofu with the tomatoes in a blender. This might sound a little bit strange, but I promise the tofu taste does not remain, and it makes for a very creamy vegan pasta sauce. I topped it with some garlic, some oregano, some basil, salt, pepper, and nutritional yeast. If it's a little too thick, just add a little water a little bit at a time until it's good to go. Like I outlined in the first video, I went orange picking as well, and I received 22 oranges. I could not possibly eat 22 oranges in a week, so I juiced several at a time. This was a great thing to have first thing in the morning, and it helped me get rid of all of those oranges instead of them just going bad. Some of the potatoes I got in my box were Okinawan sweet potatoes, or benimo. I just roasted them and topped them with a little bit of milk and butter. Now it's time to attempt to make onigiri. Onigiri are little Japanese rice snacks, so I made a miso filling with miso paste, soy sauce, just a touch of sweetener, a small splash of water, a small splash of vinegar, and then a dollop of mayonnaise as well, mixed until well combined. Then I added the rice to my onigiri press, added a dollop of the miso mixture, and then topped it off with some more rice. And that's it to making onigiri. It's really simple with one of these presses. I probably could not have done this by hand. And then I dumped it onto my plate and ate it with a slice of nori. I didn't film the end of this meal, but this ended up being a really delicious curry made with a lot of local foods, plus a can of garbanzo beans I just had lying around. And that is all the recipes that I have to show you that I made the week that I ate completely local foods. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you'd like to see more videos like this down below. And until next time, remember that the small changes you make have a big impact in the long run. Bye guys.